Aye, shepherd's pie. Greetings from the Philippines. Welcome back to the channel for a coffee and a chat. Going to talk about a couple of things today. I'm going to update the rooster situation, which we have found ourselves in recently. If anyone doesn't know what I'm talking about, I will put a link down in the description, because this is kind of a follow-on from my last video, an update, if you will. And also, I am going to talk about the potential dangers of upsetting your Filipino neighbours, or your neighbours anywhere in Southeast Asia, and embroiling yourself in a feud. Because unfortunately, if you don't handle things the right way, these things do have the potential to turn very nasty very quickly. And sadly, in my time in Southeast Asia, I have been involved in, shall we say, a family feud, a neighbour feud, which I didn't handle well at all, and it did turn rather nasty, rather quickly. So I will tell you about that in the hope that you might benefit from my experience and not make the same mistakes I did. But first of all, the whinging pom is not going to whinge. The whinging pom is happy today. I'd like to think I'm happy most of the time. I don't think it's fair, this accolade, the whinging pom. I don't really care. Always makes me laugh when people put it in the comments, because I think it's that the best you can come up with. The purpose of this channel is to talk about my experiences, whether they're positive or negative. Seems to me, if I highlight the positive ones, there are a number of people who get upset saying, "Oh, it's crap over there, it's this, blah, blah, blah." If I highlight a negative, "You shouldn't have come here if you don't like this, it's the Philippines, get out of the country, blah, blah, blah." And as I've said many times, if I upset Filipinos, I apologise, not my intention. If you're an expat, couldn't care less. You leave the country. You're in no position to tell me what to do. It's not your country, and thank God you don't make the rules. Anyway, here we go. The roosters. Depending on your perspective, from our perspective, it is good news. They have gone. They went within 24 hours of my last video. Nothing to do with me, because a lot of people saying, "Oh, you're going to cause problems, you're going to do this, you're going to do that." Just for the record, all I did was ask a question. I asked the question, are roosters allowed in this subdivision? I didn't make a complaint. I didn't ask anyone to make a complaint on my behalf. I didn't confront the neighbours. I didn't do anything other than ask the question whether they are allowed in our subdivision where we recently moved. That's it. If it is a crime for asking a question in the Philippines, then lock me up and throw away the key. But I don't think that's too bad, is it? I mean, if you do think it's bad to ask a question, well, I don't know what I can say to you. I'm obviously beyond redemption. But no, they're not allowed in this subdivision. I asked the question. Our landlord took it on board to look into the situation. The landlord of the property who the people live at, who've got the roosters, was not happy at all, because roosters are against the rules of the subdivision, and subsequently told them to remove the roosters, which they did. So we are now roosterless again, as we were at the beginning of last week before these chaps moved in. Now, as I say, I have no idea if they were the only people to complain. I don't know if any of the other neighbours complained. I don't know who was upset, who was not. I do not know how our neighbours have taken it, whether they're upset or not. All I can tell you is the rules are that they're not allowed to keep roosters here. Their landlord did not know they were keeping roosters here. And the second the landlord found out, who I believe is a Filipino, they told them to remove the roosters. And that is what's happened. Now, whether there will be a simmering resentment because of this, with the neighbours against us, I don't know, you know, and there's no point worrying about that, because it's beyond my control. And as I said, all I did was ask a question and make a video. No one has any idea who else complained, whether they did, whether they didn't. I didn't tell them to remove the roosters. I didn't ask anyone to ask them to remove the roosters. So, regardless of what some of you might think, my conscience is clear on this one. And I'm not naive enough to not think that there could be ramifications or the roosters could reappear next week. This is the Philippines. You have to roll with the punches. So there we go. But when I made the video, I did have some well-meaning people in the comments. I had a few trolls as well saying, be careful, watch yourself, this can turn ugly. I had a couple of good friends message me and say, steady how you go on this one, be careful, these things. And I appreciate that. It's good advice because, as I say, I have been in a situation, a family feud, which I'll talk about now. I know from experience how quickly these things can escalate and how unpleasant it is. In fact, I've been in 2 feuds, if you think about it, because I had that feud over there with my nutcase neighbour. The reality of that one is, on reflection though, there was nothing I could do about that. He was mentally ill. However, my feud in Thailand, in retrospect, there is a lot I could have done differently and should have done differently. I'm not at all proud of how I handled that, but you can't turn the clock back. All you can do is learn from your experiences. And as I say, what will be in this situation. There is nothing I can do about it, sadly. So this is my tale from my time living in the provinces in Phetchabun in Thailand. Now, it is a Thai story, but trust me, the same rules apply in the Philippines. It always amazes me how, I'm not an expert on life. I don't claim to be an expert on all things Southeast Asia, but having spent over 12 years now in Southeast Asia, the lessons I learned in Cambodia, the lessons I learned in Thailand have put me in good stead for the Philippines. A lot of people who've been here a long time in the comments seem to believe they are the font of all knowledge. If you haven't been here 20, 30 years, you don't know what you're talking about. Well, in my humble opinion, experience, if you are above average or above average intelligence, you will pick up most of what you need to know here in the first 6 months if you just listen and you learn and you watch. It's not a difficult country to work out, really, if you take your time to try and understand the culture. I would suggest it is far more difficult in Thailand and Cambodia. It takes a lot longer over there to really start to appreciate and understand the way people's minds tick. But as I say, I'm not new. It's not my first rodeo. Yes, I'm new to the Philippines in terms of I have lived here for 2 years only, or over 2 years now. But, a lot of it is, as they will say in Thailand, same. Well, they have roosters over there. They rooster fight. It's a huge thing in Thailand. It's a huge thing in Cambodia. It's a huge thing in Southeast Asia. And for the record, I don't have a problem with roosters. I said, I've always said I grew up in London, in cities where there's lorries, there's sirens and all that all the time. We just moved here. One of the things that attracted us about it was a rooster-free zone. Anyway, I've gone on about it. I'm not gonna dig that up. It's moved on and hopefully it's done. So what happened in Thailand? Well, basically, I was living up in a small village just outside Phetchabun city, about 6 to 8 kilometers outside. And it was very much a family place in the sense that everyone was related to everyone. You had to go literally 2 kilometers to get past a house where they weren't in some way related to my girlfriend at the time, whether they were blood relations or married in or whatever. Everybody knew everyone. Everyone was inexplicably entwined. And I enjoyed living there. And I had been there for about 4 years when the feud started. And the reason I'm saying this is a lot of people will find this hard to believe, but I was of good standing in that village. I know that because of the way people reacted when the feud took place. If I hadn't been in good standing, I'm sure I would have come unstuck. I really would have done. And I think, having spoken to people who lived in Thailand for a long time, my experience is quite unusual in the set that I was kind of accepted as being part of the community, because when I moved there was only one other Westerner in the village, a guy called Ryan from the UK, and he left, and it was just me. There were no other expats, and I socialised with Thais. My friends were Thais. You know, I did everything Thai. I was living with Thais. I learnt the language. You know, I became, you know, so I had good friends there who were Thais, and they came to my aid when I had these problems, which some people find hard to believe, but it is the reality anyway. So what I'm trying to say in a roundabout way is, kids, don't do this at home. It won't end up the same way as it did with me, most likely. And I am not proud of the way I handled this. I shouldn't have done what I did. And I learned some valuable lessons, which is why I'm trying to impart them on you. It's going to take a long video. I can't work out a way to word this. So anyway, been living about 4 years, and there a land dispute emerged. Basically, my girlfriend had bought some land and she had built a house. And living next door to her was her uncle, just in front of her, and right in front of the house was her grandmother, who she had purchased the land from. And adjacent to her on this side, or us rather, was her cousin, who was quite a good friend of mine. And that was it. They were all related. And as far as I was aware, she had bought the land and it was all hers. However, as time went on, her grandmother got sicker and sicker. She had dementia and she required more care. Now, the only people who were looking after her, per se, was us, really, because the son next door, great bloke, good friend of mine, he wasn't particularly interested. The pressure always falls on the daughters or the women in the family in Thailand usually. And her daughters, she had 3, they had all moved to Bangkok, so they weren't there. And they were sending money, so they were being good in that sense, but they weren't, you know, particularly being as hands-on as they might have been. And I'll be honest now, my girlfriend at the time probably wasn't as good a granddaughter or daughter as many Thais would be. She was quite unusual, and she wasn't as family orientated as most Thais. So as time went on, she was doing more and more and more, and she was getting a bit resentful that they weren't doing as much as she perceived they should, and they weren't happy because they didn't think she was doing as much as they perceived she would or should. And I was doing my best to keep out of it. Obviously, I was being supportive to her because she was my partner, and I didn't really know them. And, you know, I was looking at it from a Western point of view, agreeing with what Moshi said, but very cognizant of the fact it is the Thai culture. And, you know, you can't expect them to think like a Westerner, and you shouldn't try and make them think like a Westerner, because who is to say who is right and who is wrong? But they had a row one night, and basically the husband of one of the daughters said, like, you know, look, we're letting you live here on the basis that you look after your grandmother. If you're not going to look after your grandmother, you know, we could kick you out and get someone else in. So she come back in tears, and I'm like, well, what's the matter, etc., etc. And she told me what they said. I said, how can they do that? It's your place, you bought it. Well, she did not have the paperwork. She hadn't bought it legally. She had paid for it. She had given it to them, but she didn't have any documents to say it was hers, which led for several weeks of unhappiness. She was very sad. I didn't like it. It came out a couple more times. This threat was loosely made. If she didn't do this to help mother, didn't help to do this, which I found annoying. I didn't think it was fair that they were putting this pressure on her. So I said to her, look, what will it cost to get the paperwork? Why can't you just get the paperwork? To which they said they will have to sign off on it. And I said, well, I asked them to do it. And she said, just tell them you want the paperwork done. And if you don't get the paperwork done, you won't do any more help. Maybe I should have said that, maybe I shouldn't. But anyway, they came up with a figure that they wanted to sign the paperwork and make it legally hers so she could stay there. And it was exorbitant. It wasn't a big figure, about £3,000, something like that. And obviously she didn't have that money. And I said, no, I'm not paying that. Because I worked out there were a few places being sold in the village. I knew what land went for. I knew the size of it. I knew what she had paid for it. She hadn't paid much below market value, and she built a house at her own expense. And in the time we'd been there, we'd had a few family members stay there rent free. So I didn't like the way it was going. So in the end, I worked out what I thought it was worth, and said to her, "Tell them we'll give them this for it." And she said, "Well, they want." I said, "Well, tell them this is what it's worth. This is what we're going to give them. I'm going to throw in a little bit more on top, but we want the paperwork done and we want it sorted." And they accepted. It was less than £1,000, and they all had quite good jobs. I mean, a couple of them were married to Westerners, so they didn't need the money. So it's not like I was trying to, shark them, as the expression goes. But I thought that was a fair amount. So they agreed to it as well, and that was that. And we got some pegs down from the council. They came and marked it down, and exactly where it was, and lined it all off and that. And we went into the city, to the council, the municipal building, and we got it done. And I wasn't happy about it. I should have probably been a bit more gracious about it. But the way I looked at it, I didn't like the fact they were making threats against my girlfriend. They were threatening to kick her out when they knew she bought the land. But we didn't really fall out. I hadn't realised we'd fallen out at that stage. And we got the deal done. Now, as I say, this is why I'm telling this story. You've got to be aware that you don't always see. Filipinos are a bit like Thais. They're not confrontational people. It's not, they can be violent, they can be confrontational, but they tend to avoid it. More so in Thailand. If a Thai's furious, they'll be very quiet. They'll avoid eye contact. They don't tend to shout and raise their fists and, all this. And they will be simmering away underneath. And I think that applies to most Southeast Asian countries. So I used to drink a lot in those days. Again, make no apologies for it. I was younger. I was 41, I think, 41 or 42 at this stage. And it was very much a drinking culture in that village. We would, in the evenings, most evenings, you would have a barbecue outside. People would catch fish, all that kind of good stuff, and vegetables, and people would cook courses. And you would sit outside until the early hours, and you would drink Hong Tong and Samsung. You just did that. It was kind of like the thing to do, and we did that quite a bit. And I drank too much, that's what it was. But everyone was there. I don't do it now. Couldn't do it now. Wouldn't want to do it now. But and one of those nights, I'd been drinking next door, and I woke up in the morning. And I was on the bed. I'd had far too much to drink. And my girlfriend is staring at me, and literally just staring at me with daggers. And daggers the expression, not with a knife, just staring at me. And I looked at her and I thought, what's going on? And I just felt this searing pain in my wrist. I couldn't move my wrist. My whole arm was swollen. It was big. And I'm sitting there thinking, what is she looking at me like that for? And why is my arm like that? And I had no recollection of the night before. Couldn't remember anything that had happened. And I'm like, what's the matter? And she was furious, and I couldn't work out why. And it transpires what happened is I had a fight with her cousin who lived next door. And it had been quite a nasty fight. As I say, I'm being honest in this video. I'm not making myself. I'll tell you exactly what I did, and I'm not proud of it. And I don't know why I did it, because I was drunk, and I can't remember. But basically, what happened is, and I found this out afterwards, the cousin next door, who was my friend, who was her closest cousin, had been expecting to get a cut of the money. He was expecting us to pay the full amount they had asked for, and that he was going to get a cut out of it. Even though he had pretended to be on our side, he wasn't. And his father had expected to get a cut out of it. But his father was okay about it. It transpired afterwards. But Bird wasn't. that was his nickname Bird. He was not happy about it. And that night we had been drinking, and it had been the end of the water festival over there, Songkran, and there had been water thrown around. But he had been angry, and basically he had kicked off. I've just got people telling me what happened. It had turned out an argument. He'd thrown some water on me. I had thrown some water on him. Then he had got aggressive, and he had basically attacked me. Now, the thing is, I was about 40 years old then. He was about 10 years younger than me. He was quite big for a Thai, and he was a very good Muay Thai fighter. I have been led to believe. I never saw him fight, but I'd learned over time, conversations and that, he was quite a good Muay Thai fighter, or had been in his youth. And he had a bit of a reputation for being able to take care of himself. Now, I don't know if that's why I did what I did, because I thought in my mind that I couldn't win a fight with him, or maybe I had just changed my mind and suddenly got angry. But basically it transpired what had happened is he had attacked me. He had been broken up. I had backed down and said that I was going to go home, and I had apologised, or just basically backed down, gone back to the house, but I hadn't gone back to the house. I had gone round the back of the house, and I had jumped him. I had attacked him from behind. Cold cocked, I think, is the expression. As I say, I do not know. I'm not proud of that at all. It is a shitty thing to do, I know. But that's what happened. I don't know if in my mind I thought, I'm not going to win this. The only way I'm going to win it is if I get the first punch in, or whether I just got back to the house and sort of sod this. But anyway, I'd basically come round. He'd been sitting down. I'd smacked him and just basically waded him. And that's how I'd perceivably broken my hand hitting him. So we went to the hospital. They thought I'd broken my hand. I didn't. I had an x-ray and that. The doctor was surprised it wasn't broken. I just had bad swelling around my wrist. And I didn't know what happened then at that stage. I just knew we'd had a fight. I didn't know what happened. But then when I got back home, there were a couple of Thai friends who were waiting for me, or they came in as soon as they saw me arrived. And they came over and they told me what had happened. And I was like, oh, shit. Did I do that? Wow. And the two that came around were on my side. They had taken my side. They had broken it up. Apparently there'd been a little bit of a fracas. That's why I'm saying I was quite well in the village, in the sense that there were about 5 of us there drinking, of the men. The women were there, obviously. And 2 of the men had jumped in on my side. One had tried to break it up, and another one was on his side. So that's not normal. You know, a lot of people will tell you, if you get in a row with a Thai or a Filipino, all the Filipinos or all the Thais, nothing to do, they'd all jump in on the side, but they didn't anyway. So I'm sitting there thinking, what am I going to do now? I'm going to have to apologise. This was wrong, etc. And then he appears, and he comes round, Bird, and he's with a joint friend of ours, and he apologised. And he was like, I'm sorry, like, and he kissed my hand because I had the bandage on there. And I'm like, no, look, I am sorry. You know, it shouldn't have happened. I do apologise. And his attitude was, no, I should have respected you because you're my uncle. Because you're not his uncle, but he always called me Long Simon, Uncle Simon. And it was put to bed. He didn't stay for a drink. He was obviously upset about it, in the sense that, understanding the Thai culture, he had probably lost face. And if it had been me, I would have been annoyed. But in my defence, he did start it. You know, I didn't. Everyone was saying he was the one that started it. I shouldn't have gone round and done that. You know, as I say, it's not my style. I was younger. Anyway, I've apologised enough for doing that. But he went away. And I said to a couple of them, I don't think this is over. And they were like, no, it is over. Don't worry about it. It's okay. You're friends, you're friends, you're friends. Now, I wasn't sure what the reception I was going to get in the village would be of that, because everyone was related. But I was quite surprised, because everywhere I went for the next few days, everyone I saw, from the old men to the young men and some of the wives, would be, oh, boxing, boxing, boxing. you know, they thought it was funny. You know, everyone was laughing about it, and I'll be like, no, I'm bad. You know, Mayday, Bob Mayday. You know, and could just apologise and saying I was bad. It was my fault. And they were nearly all of them were like, you know, no, it's okay. We talk. It's fine. You know, these things happen, kind of stuff. Don't worry about it. And a few people said to me, they will sort it out, not a problem. So after a couple of days, I thought maybe it was gone. But strange thing happened about 3 or 4 nights later. We were having a drink outside the house, and a guy who I did not know, and this is why this was so damn strange. He was a big guy, and he did the security at a bar called Cosset Hill Hotel, which had a disco in town. He was one of the doormen there, and he was big for a Thai. He was like a bodybuilder, and he was a menacing chap. And he turned up at the house, and he like came down and sat down with us. Or came over talking. And I said, would you like a drink? Because that's what you do in Thailand, you know, customary, whether you know people or not. And they sit down and they have a drink, etc. And I'm thinking, why is he here? And looking at him and the conversation's going, he's laughing and joking. And he stayed for a few drinks. And then he said he was going. But then he looked at me and said, next door, no problem. No problem. And he's pointing at the house. Because I'd not seen Bird say, Bird was avoiding drinking with us. And I was avoiding, you know, I asked him and he was like, no, he'd work or whatever. So you could tell he was still a bit, and I wasn't drinking a lot. I was keeping it calm. You know, other people were coming around the house. I was being sociable. I was on my guard too. But he's telling me not to worry about next door, just to leave it, and that's it. And I'm thinking, and I said, well, I am going to leave it. You know, don't worry, I'm not going to do anything. But then, because I thought he was warning me off, saying don't, you know, as in you'll like mess with me kind of thing. But then my girlfriend and the cat said, no, it's not what he's saying. What he's saying. What he's saying is there won't be a problem because he'll sort the problem out. And I'm like, well, you don't have to sort the problem. There is no problem, you know, that's it. But that got me thinking, because this is like a week later now. Why does he think there's a problem? Why has he come all the way? Why is he getting involved? But if he thinks there's a problem, then there must be a problem. And that kind of put me on guard. And then the next night, our dog went missing. It disappeared, never to return. And it was a street dog. Well, it's a village dog, if you want to call it that. It wasn't our dog. It had turned up. I'd looked after it for a few years, and Dan just disappeared. And I started to wonder. I thought, have they done something with my dog? You know, is this a way to get back at me? To this day, I don't know if they had or not. I don't think they did, as I will explain now. But about 2 days after that, I went outside for coffee in the morning, and Pim, my girlfriend's daughter, was there crying, and one of our cats was dead, Tom, lying on the ground. He had been poisoned. Now, anyone who watched the channel for a while will know I am an animal lover. That is my weakness. Some people were saying poison the roosters. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't kill an animal. And when the cat was dead, I thought, right. And I looked at it, there were no marks on it. I thought the only logical thing is it's been bitten by a snake or it has been poisoned. But I'll go with the snake theory, because why drive yourself nuts thinking it is the neighbours that have poisoned it? But about 4 hours after that, one of our other cats was dead. Found it at the back of the house, same thing. So I knew then that the cats had been poisoned, and I knew that in my mind that the dog had been taken and was probably dead too. And I did not take that well. And Bird came out that afternoon and he was doing some gardening, he was doing some stuff with some mangoes, and he looked at me and he smiled and said, Swaddy Cup. And I was like, Swaddy. And I was sitting there and I was thinking, right, because we still had a couple of cats left. I thought, I'm not having this. And I thought lots of bad thoughts. I was very tempted just to go over there and lay into him, which would have been stupid because he had a knife. He was cutting down his mangoes. But I was literally livid. And I said to my girlfriend, I'm gonna do him. Which I say, I'm not proud of it. This is stupid. And it would have been a very stupid thing to do. But the reason I'm telling you this is because it is an important lesson learned. I don't know what would have happened the next day, because another one of our cats died of poisoning. But the thing that saved the whole situation was that night I heard shouting and I heard a dog howling, and one of his dogs was dying. It had been poisoned, and one of his other dogs had died in the morning. So it wasn't him that was poisoning the dogs. He lost, I think he had 5 dogs. He lost 3 of them. One of them didn't get poisoned because I kept it in the house. The other one survived. And that was horrible. We had 4 days of this dog just whining and whining. And I said, look, I'll pay for a vet to put it down or someone shoot it. And they were like, no, they were giving it olive oil and that. It was awful to hear. But it came through. It pulled through. The dog survived. We lost all 4 of our cats. And it transpired what had happened. There were a new family had moved in from Bangkok. And they were living in the village. They didn't have any relatives or any friends there. And so they didn't know anyone. They were outsiders kind of thing. And they had basically baited the whole of the land around their houses with poison. And a number of animals in the village died as a result of that. Now, I will never forget that, in the sense that this is what can happen with feuds and perceived feuds. If his dog hadn't been poisoned and I had remained convinced it was him, I don't know what would have happened. I'm not saying I'd done anything drastic, but there would have been another altercation. There would have been ramifications. I couldn't let him kill him's pet. You know what I mean? It was a red line to me, and I was wrong. And I've learned from that. It's taught me such a lesson going forward. You can't assume. You can't think you know. You need evidence. You need facts. And you don't rush into things. Because, my God, if I'd rushed into that first, I don't know what would have happened. And we got on again. It was a feud that didn't really go anywhere in the end. Yeah, we had a row. But I have not lived in that village for over 10 years now. I'm still friends with a lot of people there. I still talk to Bird on his birthday and things. I'll message him. He messaged me about 3 months ago, see how I was doing. So it was all well that ends well. But the point is, it could not have been. It could have ended very badly for everyone involved. So when people were saying, like, careful, tread carefully, don't get in a feud with your neighbours here, I've learnt my lesson. I say all I did was ask a question. I will not go around and confront people willy-nilly. There are ways to do things. And the best way, generally, is just to ignore things, live and let live. And the time we lived in the last village, there were roosters everywhere. They multiplied. I never bat an eyelid. As far as I was concerned, it was their village. They'd been there. It's their country. The Philippines is full of roosters. We moved here because there were no roosters. It changed overnight. I just asked if roosters were allowed. That's all I did. And they're gone now, There is a chance that the neighbours are simmering or someone is annoyed or hates us in the village. Well, if they do, they do. There is nothing I can do about that. I am certainly not going to do anything to antagonise the situation. And if you're living in the Philippines or Thailand, as others have said in the comments, tread carefully, because you never know what is simmering underneath. I had no idea until that night that Bird felt slighted, that he felt he had been cheated, that he had lost money in the purchase of the land. He kept it quiet because that's what Thais tend to do. It's what Filipinos, they internalise that anger until it comes out. I won't make those same mistakes again. You never know. Don't get too close. Keep your distance. Don't assume you've won an argument or a discussion just because the other person appears to have capitulated. And just tread carefully, because I'm under no illusions that could have gone another way in that village, and I could well not be here today. I know of feuds in Thailand, and I've heard of them over here where people have ended up no more. I know there's certain words you can't use on YouTube. Things can escalate. I was very lucky in that, and as I say, if I could turn back the clock and do things differently, I would have done. I think it's unusual that Bird, accepted what happened. Because it wasn't Marquis of Queensberry the way I did it. If he'd done that to me, I would have felt, I wouldn't have been happy, but he didn't, and I didn't. You know, it happened. It happened anyway. That's the update with the roosters. I do apologise if I've gone too long. That is my story of a feud in Thailand. And just one thing that did surprise me about that was, I mean, our cats had gone. They died. I couldn't quite understand why the villagers didn't embroil themselves in a feud with the couple that came from Bangkok. They weren't happy about it. They were very angry about it. A few of the wives were going out in the evenings and collecting the bait because they'd keep putting bait out, they'd take it away. I was very much, didn't say it to them because I respected the culture, but I was saying to Angelique, I don't know why they don't go and confront them and say you killed our dogs or whatever. You know, I was very pissed off about the cats, but it had already happened. So it wasn't like I had any cats to protect. The dog never came back. I don't know if the dog was taken as part of the feud, or Dan, bless him, maybe he ate some of the poison as well. I think we might have found his body. I don't know. Sadly, he was a lovely dog. Never saw him again. But these are the things you think of. I mean, I tell you now, my biggest concern when we fell out with, or when I realised there were going to be consequences because of the roosters, or they might think we've complained or caused a problem, my first reaction was our two dogs. I'm sitting there thinking, God, I don't want this to escalate. I don't want it. I don't really care if they do end up keeping the rooster. You know, I just don't want to be worried that I wake up one morning and the dogs have been poisoned, because that is the kind of thing that can happen. It can drive you nuts, the thinking, the internalising, knowing what's coming next. Because very rarely is it going to be like over here or in Thailand where someone knocks on your door like they would in the West and you shout it out and maybe roll around in the ground or get lawyers involved or whatever. Things in Asia seem to be a bit quiet, a bit sneakier. The things get vandalised, animals get killed, you know, and then it festers and festers and festers until something terrible happens. So do your best to avoid it. Anyway, there you go. That is my tale. I say, not proud at all. Say what you like, judge me in the comments. You know, you're probably right. Don't really care. If you like the video, smash the like button. If you haven't subscribed, it would be fantastic if you did. But whether you do, whether you don't, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, stay safe and be lucky.